Good morning and welcome to this reflection for Wednesday, February 24th. My goodness, we're almost at the end of February. And this week, on this first week of Lent, I begin with a psalm reading. Psalm 25, verses 1 to 10. And this reflection is paraphrased from a book on Lent written by N.T. Wright that I was intrigued by what he had to say this week. In you, Lord my God, I put my trust. I trust in you. Do not let me be put to shame, nor let my enemies triumph over me. No one who hopes in you will ever be put to shame. But shame will come to those who are treacherous without cause. Show me your ways, Lord. Teach me your paths. Guide me in your truth and teach me, for you are God, my Savior, and my hope is in you all day long. Remember, Lord, your great mercy and love. They are from old. Do not remember the sins of my youth and my rebellious ways. According to your love, remember me, for you, Lord, are good. Good and upright is the Lord. Therefore he instructs sinners in his ways. He guides the humble in what is right and teaches them his way. And all the ways of the Lord are loving and faithful toward those who keep the demands of the covenant. N.T. Wright tells of a time when he met up with a friend who was working on a great Victorian missionary and explorer, David Livingstone. Livingstone was a great hero to the 19th century Christians. He was able to combine evangelistic zeal with a real hunger for both geographical and scientific exploration. And he genuinely believed that he was bringing civilization to the vast and hitherto unmapped interior of Africa. This was a time long before people became cynical about such things. Livingstone said, I am prepared to go anywhere, provided it be forward. Today, we might want to be pointing out the foolishness of blundering on into the unknown and of doing things that might have, to say the least, more ambiguous results than he intended. But I think we can all agree that there is no doubt about his sheer courage and energy, which puts most of us to shame. This visionary exploration comes to mind when praying through this psalm today. That is because this psalm is the prayer of someone who heard God's call to set off and go somewhere, but as yet is not sure where this somewhere is. This, to be sure, has been a common experience of God's people all through the ages. For example, in the book of Acts, the great tale of the missionary expansion of Paul and his companions come to mind. Missionary journeys where they were not certain where they were going next and have to wait in puzzlement for future instructions. Quite often our prayer life is shaped by the immediate. Our prayers reflect what we are facing in that particular moment, on that particular day, in that particular week. This is often the cause for the psalmist too. We can find in the psalter typically a snapshot of what the psalmist was facing on that particular moment, on that particular day, in that particular week. For David, that could have reflected his distress on the account of his enemies' attacks, or his anguish over his own wrongful actions, or his praise to God who answered his prayer. For us, it could be our distress over events in our country, or anguish over our child's poor choices, or praise to God for a new job. This is where we generally live in our prayer lives. So the heart of this prayer, the psalm, is in verses 4 and 5, where he says, Make me to know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Lead me in your truth and teach me. Should that not be our prayer day by day, especially now that we've set off on our Lenten journey? The problem is, though, that we don't know exactly where we are going. There are also two other difficulties which we'll be aware of too. First, there seems to be all sorts of hostile forces all around us. This first Sunday of Lent that just passed, we heard the text about the temptations of Jesus. This is often a day to also reflect on our own temptations. And anyone who is determined to make a fresh start and be ready to go forward with Jesus into the unknown is almost bound to find that testing of some or another begins to increase dramatically. N.T. Wright shares the story in this reflection of a friend who, after many years of pondering God's call, finally goes forward for training in full-time ministry. Sound familiar to any of you? Almost at once, things begin to go wrong. Serious illness in the family, financial problems, sharp opposition from friends, believing that he was making a wrong decision. This is classic. It's like what happens when you are out for a walk and suddenly come out from behind a high wall into the teeth of a storm. It's in that moment that we need to pray what the psalmist, to not let our enemies exalt us. But as we well know, there are hostile forces in the world. There are also forces within which we can feel threatened. Here in this psalm, we find 4 of them. The sense of shame that will come if we blunder off in the wrong direction. The psalmist addresses some of the troubles that life can bring. He is concerned that he may suffer shame and possibly further defeat from his enemies. The recognition of possible perils in life serve as possible correctiveness for many today who perceive life with God to be a pain-free, enemy-free existence. In order to be able to pray for our enemies as instructed by Jesus is to recognize that we may have enemies. The truth is that we still wield a great amount of power and influence, so our talk of enemies needs to be grounded in reality. They are all familiar, especially to those of us who have set off on a Lenten journey without knowing where it will lead us. The amazing thing about the Psalms, though, is that the answer to our questions is found in the character of God, the God we know and see in Jesus. We read that God is trustworthy, God's way is truth, and God provides deliverance from harm, and above all, God's love is constant. I think there are times that it is important to be reminded of these attributes of God, sort of like picking up stepping stones and placing them one after another in the river that we are trying to cross. The psalmist has hope for the present and future because of the ways of the Lord has acted in the past. To hope is to remember forward. To hope is to recall those particular ways God has acted in the past, and to let that continue to shape our identity as ones who trust in the Lord. And so the psalmist hopes as one waiting for God to show up with good news. Then we are able to walk ahead, not because we know the way or are feeling especially brave, but because we know there is solid ground under our feet. This first week of Lent is the time to look God in the face and learn to place our trust with God each step of the way. I hope you can find the courage to take that step forward as we continue this Lenten journey. May it be so.